would be honored if you would join us.
Greetings and welcome to another YouTube episode of Film Stories with me, Dan Cooper. I've been on if you've been following the episodes lately, I've been on a bit of a comic book tear for the last few episodes. So this time around, I wanted to change tack somewhat and revisit a less celebrated film that I'm very fond of, which nobody really talks about anymore. So let's go back and revisit The Place Beyond the Pines. If you haven't seen this film, don't worry, I'm not going to spoil it for you. It is a movie well worth a watch, and it is no real spoiler to say that the very basic premise of the film is that it follows Ryan Gosling's character, who falls into a life of crime whilst trying to provide for his young family. And the idea for this story germinated whilst Gosling and the director, Derek Cianfrance, were discussing working together on a different film. That would be 2010's Blue Valentine, which indeed they did go on to work together on. And the two were having dinner and discussing fantasies when Gosling reportedly revealed to the director that one of his fantasies involved robbing banks in a very particular fashion, atop a motorcycle. Again, no major spoiler that the trailers won't show you. And if you have seen the film, you'll know that those motorcycle sequences are pretty spectacular. And in one of those curious twists of fate that we seem to come across all the time whilst looking into the production of films, Cianfrance had actually been working on a script where a character did indeed rob banks in the same way that Gosling had just described to him. And they do say that acting is often a form of wish fulfillment, and here Gosling had just been offered the opportunity to effectively live out a fantasy, without the usual concerns that come with bank robberies, such as languishing in prison, or being riddled with bullets, or having one of those dye bags explode and ruin your outfit. And so, after shooting Blue Valentine and getting that done, they began to really work on the film. And straight from the off, Cianfrance decided that he wanted to really focus on finding imperfections, because he believed, as a former documentary maker, that reality and truth were defined by flaws, by imperfections in performances, imperfections in form. And this is actually something that I briefly touch upon in my feature in the latest issue of the Film Stories print magazine that looks at practical effects as opposed to computer-generated imagery. This idea of the truth lying in the flaw. And yes, that was a smooth plug, wasn't it? Cianfrance put this quest for the imperfect at the heart of all of his creative decisions. For example, it's one of the reasons that he chose to shoot the movie on 35mm film rather than digital. In his words, shooting on film created that sense of urgency and tension, and he wanted to harness that mood. Not to mention that the practical imperfections of film too, just the tiny imperfections and flaws, that's what he was looking for, both in a form sense and aesthetic sense, but really in a wider sense too. And Cianfrance adopted the same approach with his performances as well, looking for the humanity in the performances by looking for the flaws. Here's a quote from an interview that he did. "I like living moments. I made documentaries for so long. I think there was something that happened to me when I started going to movies and seeing a proliferation of perfection on the screen." He says, "I was thinking, I don't really know heroes and I don't really know villains, but I do know the grey. I started thinking that the movies I wanted to make would be about people in the grey area." And that's one of the attractive things about this film. It has a great cast of characters that we'll come on to in a moment, but they're all operating in that grey space. There's a complete absence of perfection in the film. And in an interview, it may be the same interview with The Hollywood Reporter in the wake of the film's release, the director said that actually his favourite scene of the movie was never even filmed. It involved a moment between Gosling and the fantastic Ben Mendelsohn, where these two actors were essentially warming up, or whatever the acting equivalent of warming up is, but they were just beginning to kind of get into the scene together, and that moment, Cianfrance said, had a spontaneity, it had an energy that he just wanted to capture. By the time he got the lights and the camera set up and they were shooting, it was an energy that couldn't be replicated, at least for the director, and recreating it meant that it had lost what made it so special, and it didn't feature in the film's final cut. That idea about it then becoming rehearsed, then becoming something more perfect, was exactly what he didn't want. He wanted performances to be rough around the edges. He wanted the film's aesthetic to have that same look. I did mention the cast briefly a moment ago, and that's another reason why I'm a strong advocate for this film. It has a wonderful ensemble cast, all of them doing really strong work. Gosling and Mendelsohn I've already mentioned, but the movie also features great turns from Bradley Cooper, Eva Mendes, Mahershala Ali, Rose Byrne, Bruce Greenwood, Ray Liotta's in there with a really kind of great sinister turn, Dane DeHaan, and the list goes on. I imagine it was probably so extensive a cast because stars are attracted to those kind of ensemble casts. And Bradley Cooper certainly said at the time that he wanted in on the production because he wanted to work with Stephen Francis and he wanted to work with Gosling. And as such, the more talent the film appropriated, the more talent was attracted to it. And the casting gained real momentum. However, despite being able to assemble such an impressive ensemble, it wasn't all plain sailing. San Francis's regular cinematographer, and Andrei Perec, I hope I pronounced that right, who shot Blue Valentine with him, didn't make The Place Beyond the Pines, didn't collaborate with San Francis on The Place Beyond the Pines. And there was a very strange reason for this. So in a 2013 interview with Vanity Fair, San Francis revealed that the cinematographer had called him in tears 8 weeks before the shoot and said he couldn't do the film. And when San Francis asked him why, he said it was because he had a particularly vivid nightmare that the DP on the film, the director of photography, the cinematographer, had died making the film, and he couldn't do it. He wouldn't make it. He wouldn't do that to his family. And when the director realised that he was unable to change the mind of his cinematographer, he duly went out, and he found somebody else. He found Sean Bobbitt, who was a former war photographer, who, having found himself in the centre of many dangerous situations, and therefore had no compunctions about shooting the film, even when Cian France told him about The Prophecy. Bobbitt, by the way, is probably best known for his beautiful cinematography on all of Steve McQueen's films, most recently Widows. However, the interesting thing is, then The Prophecy almost came true. If you watch the very first shot of the film, which will hopefully be playing for you right now on the video, assuming that I don't fall afoul of YouTube's regulations, it's this magnificent tracking shot that introduces Gosling's character. And incidentally, on what we're talking about that shot, I can't think of, offhand at least, of a movie that has a better opening and closing sequence than Place Beyond the Pines. It's the film with the best opening and closing shot, I think, that is out there. If you look at better openings, maybe De Palma's Snake Eyes is a favourite of mine, the tracking shot. You could look at Touch of Evil as a classic. You could even, maybe offer up Lucas's A New Hope if you want to extol the virtues of visual storytelling. But I can't think of a movie which has a better opening and closing shot than this one, although I'm happy to hear ideas. Anyway, I digress. This tracking shot ends with a kind of Texas switch where a stunt rider's cleverly swapped places with Gosling without the viewer really registering that. And according to Cian France, what Bobbitt, the DP, wants to do next is move the camera into the Globe of Death. And the camera will track into the Globe of Death as these motorcycles zoom perilously close to each other, and of course to the cinematographer, because the camera, and therefore the cameraman, is inside of that Globe of Death, with those motorcycles zooming inches away from Bobbitt's face or head, or, well, they're really zooming everywhere, so... and the fact it's called the Globe of Death just doesn't really make it sound that safe, does it? But Bobbitt insisted, and maybe this comes down to the war photography background, that despite Cian Francis' reluctance, he maintained that he was going to get the shot from inside. So Cian Francis was quite nervous, as you might expect. The prophecy had been laid down about a DP dying on set, and his nervousness increased when there was actually a collision, and the bikers ended up in a heap with Bobbitt at the bottom. Thankfully, though, the DP was unhurt, and was simply angry that he hadn't got the shot. The next night, Bobbitt would try again to get the shot, and this time would be hospitalised with a concussion when the same thing happened again. And I can only assume that's why the intended end to that tracking shot never made it into the final cut. But it's pretty ambitious. I won't talk about the closing shot in the film because that would necessitate the spoilers, and so that's something you can go out and have a look at yourself. The film itself would be financed by Steve Carell Entertainment, the production company, and get picked up for distribution by Focus, the independent arm of Universal. It would go on to make $48 million worldwide, and then do another $6 million or so on home formats. All of that from an estimated $15 million budget. Cian France, in the years since, has only released one feature-length film, which is 2016's The Light Between Oceans. Gosling, on the other hand, has been fairly prolific, but really simply seemed happy that he could live out his motorcycle bank robbing fantasy. And as he talks about in one of the Blu-ray extras, be taught how to ride a bike by one of the stunt riders from the Batman films. I believe the Nolan films. Yes, though, that is right. Batman taught Ryan Gosling how to rob banks. I know. And on that earth-shattering note, I'm going to leave you. But, of course, I will be back next week with another film story. Bye-bye. Before I go, please do please do subscribe, please do comment. Every little bit of exposure you can give helps. If you want to find more film stories, you can find Stoneman's extraordinary podcasts at your podcast downloader of choice. You can find Film Stories as a project on Twitter at Film Stories Pod. You can find us on Facebook at Film Stories Online. And of course, you can find The Jewel in the Crown, the Film Stories print magazine, at our website. That's filmstories.co.uk. Do have a good week. I'll see you back here next week for another film story. Bye now.